and welcome to Aviation Deep Dive. As we've already discussed in the first episode of this series, during the entirety of the battle fought between the Finns and the Soviets during and slightly preceding the Second World War, a multitude of former Soviet aircraft fell into Finnish hands and was subsequently used against their former owners. This kind of activity was not unheard of and was in fact quite common in certain theatres of the war, but the Finns took it to another level. Captured aircraft were modified and flown operationally to the extent that former Soviet aircraft made up a fairly significant chunk of the Finnish Air Force throughout the war. Today, we'll be looking at some of these aircraft, perhaps not as glamorous as the captured fighters or bombers, but still just as interesting. The captured seaplanes. The Finns would use two main seaplanes captured from their enemies, the Beriev MBR in two main variants, and the Shavrov S.2 flying boat. Let's begin first with the MBR, the more capable military aircraft of the two, and the one with the more substantial service record in Finnish hands. The first MBR to fall into Finnish hands was an example captured near Hamina, a city in southern Finland. Though information about its capture appears to be relatively hard to find, it was sent for repairs on June 25, 1941, by which time the Finns had actually taken control of another Soviet flying boat. Just 2 days after the beginning of Operation Barbarossa, on the 24th of June 1941, two Soviet MBRs landed near the coast of Finland, squarely in Finnish waters, presumably on some kind of reconnaissance or offensive patrol. Having not gone unnoticed, two patrol boats were sent to investigate and detain the crews, as they had illegally impeded in another country's territory. One MBR managed to take off before the patrol boats arrived, but the other opted to surrender without a fight, the aircraft being towed to shore and then transferred for repairs. If you haven't already and you're enjoying the content we make, please consider subscribing, as only 5% of my viewers are subscribed to the channel. It really helps and drives us to make more videos. Thanks. The MBR was then subsequently interned, given the registration VV81, VV standing for Venäläinen Vene, meaning Russian boat in Finnish. By the 19th of the following month, the repairs had been completed, and the aircraft was flown to Lake Haitiaine in southeast Finland, joining the first flight of Squadron 15. On the 29th of July, after a series of attempted startups in the preceding days, VV181 would undertake its one and only combat flight in Squadron 15, a sortie that apparently involved either reconnaissance or dropping propaganda leaflets on Soviet positions. On the 11th of August, it would finally be joined in Squadron 15 by the first MBR, bearing the code VV182, though its capture preceded VV181. 182 would see double the action of its fellow MBR, though of course in this context that still only amounts to 2 operational sorties with Squadron 15. Both flights were propaganda leaflet dropping flights. After these 2 sorties, the aircraft remained out of operational use for 2 months, likely due to engine troubles with the Michelin inline engine. VV183, the third MBR to fall into Finnish hands, who were really starting quite a collection of these strange aircraft, had actually been captured at the end of July, though for various reasons it had undergone a longer overhaul than the others, and after further inspections was moved to an aircraft factory on the 16th of August for more significant work to be done. But the flow of MBRs, apparently falling from the sky, pardon the pun, did not stop, as 2 days before, on the 14th of August, another MBR, partially submerged and abandoned near the coast, was spotted by a Blackburn Ripon crew returning from a mission. Taken to a depot and given the code VV184, it was determined after a closer inspection that the water damage the aircraft had taken on made it unviable to repair. It's worth noting that the MBR was constructed largely out of wood. 184 was therefore subsequently scrapped, and salvageable parts were used for upkeep on the other Finnish MBRs. It's worth noting at this point that unlike the captured DB3s we covered in the last episode, the MBRs, possibly because they were considered less useful than other captured aircraft, were not given such extensive upgrades as one might expect. They were repainted in most cases and likely given Finnish translations to the cockpit instruments, but otherwise no attempt was made to standardize the types. They were mostly just left in whatever Soviet spec they were discovered in, which varied quite a bit from aircraft to aircraft. A contributing factor to this was likely the condition of the aircraft. Even despite overhauls, they were generally in relatively poor nick and suffered from constant engine trouble. On the 15th of February 1942, a Soviet MBR fitted with skis ran out of fuel and made an emergency landing, a Finnish patrol reaching the abandoned aircraft the next day, who managed to track down the crew and take them prisoner. Flying personnel from Squadron 12 inspected the aircraft, and after a minor repair flew it to their base on the 20th. Officially, this aircraft became VV-185, but instead bore the code NA2 on its side, courtesy of the squadron. The Finnish Air Force roundel was also painted on the aircraft, but otherwise it retained its original Soviet colors, staying in Squadron 12 through March and April. On the 7th of March, the aircraft would see its first operational sortie, dropping an astonishing 100,000 leaflets, the next day dropping another 90,000, though it doesn't appear it flew much more past this limited usage. On the 27th of September, NA2 flew for the final time before being sent to be scrapped, having accumulated just 8 hours and 40 minutes flight time. The next stint of MBR operations in the Finnish Air Force began in June 1942, when the repaired VV-181, 182, and 183 were assigned to Squadron 6. Concurrently, a fifth flight was put together with the express purpose of anti-submarine in the North Baltic. VV-183 being posted here on the 28th of July alongside 2 Blackburn Ripons. The other 2 MBRs were transferred into the first flight. In August and September, the latter 2 aircraft flew 10 anti-submarine reconnaissance flights, armed with a 200-kilogram depth charge under each wing, though 3 of these flights had to be called off prematurely due to engine trouble, one of which resulted in a forced landing due to complete engine failure. Although mostly unremarkable, one possible sighting of a submarine was made on the first day of operations, when VV-182 spotted a suspicious oil slick and attacked it, dropping one of its depth charges. This combat is dubious though, as Soviet records don't corroborate that a submarine was in that area on that day. Meanwhile, VV-183, having completed 3 submarine patrols and convoy escort flights, suffered an engine failure whilst escorting a convoy. Trying to pull off an emergency landing in a crosswind, the left wing snapped in 2 and the hull was breached in 2 places. A nearby vessel rushed to the scene of the crash and managed to rescue the crew, which had miraculously survived, though the MBR, heavily damaged, sank, despite attempts to tow it to shore. This was the final nail in the coffin for the Finnish MBRs. They'd been heavily temperamental to operate at the best of times, but now random structural failures were also on the cards. The risk was deemed too great, and the other 2 MBRs were flown to a depot, never to be flown again. The Finns had never expressed interest in significant modification or in purchasing more from German stockpiles of the aircraft, unlike some other captured aircraft which were viewed more highly. Overall, the MBRs were used more for the simple fact that the Finnish Air Force wanted to use the resources at its disposal to the highest potential possible. The MBRs had been plagued by engine troubles and had never been particularly popular. Now, let's take a look at the slightly more rustic Shavrov S2, another Soviet flying boat, but a bit older and a lot lower performance, being powered by a 99 horsepower Shvetsov engine, and having a maximum speed of just 139 kilometers an hour, 86 miles an hour at sea level. Entering service with the Soviets in 1933, a couple of S2s would fall into Finnish hands in a pretty interesting sequence of events. It was August 1942, and a group of Finnish soldiers had managed to capture 3 Soviet officers. These Soviet officers had a radio, so the Finns decided to use this to their advantage and order them to radio back false information in order to set up an ambush. The Soviet officers were told to report back that they had captured 2 Finnish officers in order to set up a trap. The initial response from the radio was to tell them to kill the Finnish officers. But then they apparently changed their mind and said to keep them alive for interrogation. A date and time was set to pick up the made-up Finnish officers. The Soviets would send 2 seaplanes at midnight to land on a lake 40 kilometers south of Enegene. Sure enough, at midnight, a couple of Shavrov S-2s came cruising in and landed on the waters, unaware of the Finnish troops watching silently at the edge of the lake. One of the S-2s began taxiing to get closer to the shore, whilst the other held back. As the first drew closer and moored on the beach, the pilot was shocked to find some Finnish soldiers silently pointing rifles at him. He was implored to quietly exit the aircraft and be taken prisoner, as to not alert the other S-2 that was still further back in the lake. Eventually, the other aircraft seemed to begin to follow, but the pilot suddenly changed his mind, kicking hard on the rudder to spin around and gunning the throttle to begin a takeoff run. One of the Finns opened fire, hitting the plane, at which point the pilot jumped out into the lake and was never seen again. Whether he escaped or drowned or possibly was hit is unknown. His aircraft, the throttle still wide open, ran in circles on the lake for a while until the Finns managed to guide it to shore and shut it off. Now, with 2 aircraft in their position, the seaplanes were flown to the nearby city of Enegene and interned. Taken for a test flight by Warrant Officer Eero Pakarinen on the 5th of September, he reported that
Starttasin kello 17.35 ja kone nousi vaivattomasti ilmaan. Hidas se oli, mutta muuten normaali lento-ominaisuuksiltaan. Lensin sen 400 metrissä Äänislinnaan Solomoninlahdelle ja rullasin lentokentän rantaan.
both aircraft had some repairs done, and on the 11th were flown to receive their registration numbers, AV-186 and 187. 186, having not been shot at, was in better general condition and thus was focused on more whilst work was being done. During September and October, the aircraft were evaluated, notably by Erik Shovelius and Pekka Koko, both fighter aces working in the test squadron. On the 3rd of October, after 13 flights, AV-186 was destroyed after it snapped in half during an attempted landing, probably due to the landing gear not being retracted. Both of the men in the aircraft survived. AV-187, meanwhile, was placed into storage after the accident for about 6 months, breaking it out again for the summer of '43 for use as a liaison aircraft. On the 29th of September 1943, it was handed off to Regiment 4, where it was used as the personal mount of the commander. In September 1944, the aircraft was flown to be placed into storage indefinitely, where after a year it was finally scrapped, bringing an end to the relatively short story of the Shavrov in Finnish use. Overall, the MBR, and to a lesser degree the S2, made a contribution, albeit a small one, to the war effort during the war against the Soviets. And though they didn't prove to be hugely reliable or popular aircraft, their story is nonetheless pretty interesting and often glossed over. A huge thanks to my patrons on screen now for supporting the channel, and thank you so much for watching this video of Aviation Deep Dive. Consider liking and subscribing for more weekly content, and please also consider supporting us on Patreon. See you in the skies.